Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I want to talk to you about a plant that I think everybody should be growing. So I'm coming at you today from my front yard, which is actually a fruit tree guild, and we're hoping will become quite an abundant little food forest one day. And the plant that I want to talk to you about today falls under the category of both herbal medicine and permaculture or gardening, vegetable gardening, any type of gardening. If you garden in any way, shape, or form, this plant will be useful to you. And so without further ado, let me introduce you to Comfrey. Now I have about 6 comfrey plants on the property currently. They're growing all over. And this plant serves multiple purposes for me. So in terms of its medicinal use, I tend to use comfrey topically. This is because it is an amazing healer in terms of healing tissues. It's what we call a topical vulnerary, meaning that it's going to help repair tissue. But in this case, it is actually known as the king of herbs. And for one of the reasons is because it has the ability to really treat and heal deep tissue injuries. So I'm talking traumatic type injuries like broken bones, fractures, torn ligaments, dislocated joints, deep tissue bruising. It is stellar in this category. And I tend to use it topically for these reasons. Now, I'm going to discuss the toxicity of the plant in a little bit later on in the video, but suffice it to say, I prefer to err on the side of caution and use comfrey topically. So if I'm dealing with a deep tissue injury of some kind, we will use this plant either infused into an oil and then made into a salve, or I would use it as a poultice to help heal the tissues. And then as far as internal use, I've actually found that Symphytum homeopathic remedy works quite well. And of course doesn't have any of the known toxicity that comfrey does. It's also a really great plant for things like cuts, bites, scrapes, stings, all manner of ouchies, boo-boos, oozing, bleeding wounds, those types of things. So it can be infused into an oil. I do strongly recommend wilting the leaves first. The moisture content in comfrey is quite high. And if you don't wilt or dry the leaves first before you infuse it into oil, the chances of growing mildew and mold are very, very high. So I tend to wilt it for a few days and then infuse it in oil. For a short period of time, I'm really checking on it frequently because when comfrey turns, it's pretty nasty. So let's talk a little bit about the contraindications and one of the reasons why I tend to err on the side of caution. Now, some herbalists are going to disagree with my point of view. Susan Weed would be one of them, but again, I'll discuss that in just a minute. So comfrey is really, really high in something known as pyrrolidine alkaloids. And pyrrolidine alkaloids have a toxic effect on the liver. They are hepatotoxic. And so when taken internally, we do have to be very cognizant of this. And long-term use, you don't even really need high doses. These pyrrolidine alkaloids can build up into the system and cause liver toxicity. So if there's even a potential for this, I tend to err on the side of caution. That's always how I have functioned as a herbalist. Our plants don't have to be heroic. They don't have to be really, really strong or powerful. Like I said, the homeopathic remedy works quite well, and we don't have to worry about any of the toxicity associated. Now, the research in the last 50 or 60 years about the pyrrolidine alkaloid content in comfrey has also shown us that some of the different varieties of comfrey may have smaller amounts. So for example, the one that I'm growing, the Symphytum officinale, we do know contains high levels of pyrrolidine alkaloids, but some folks grow or have Symphytum uplandicum growing in their area, and there is some research to show that those levels may be lower. And this is where folks like Susan Weed come in. She swears by taking comfrey infusions almost daily, and her statement is, "I'm still alive," which is fine. And like I said, you're going to ask 1,000 herbalists and you're going to get 1,001 different answers, but I tend to err on the side of caution. Even using comfrey on oozing wounds and bleeding wounds, I would only do so for short periods of time. Even a sitz bath After a woman delivers vaginally, I would err on the side of caution and not use Comfrey, especially if they're going to be lactating afterwards. But that's just how I tend to do things. So the chemical constituent that's responsible for this, magical ability, almost magical ability to heal deep tissue injuries is called allantoin. Allantoin, Allantoin. And this is one of many of the chemical constituents. I've talked to you about two now, the pyrosidine alkaloids and now allantoin. But this is the one that's really responsible for this amazing ability to heal tissues. So one of the ways I use Comfrey in two ways medicinally. I like to make a freezer stash of poultices to have on hand just in case. So I'll take, you don't even need a lot, one or two nice big leaves, rip it up, put it in your blender, add just a tiny, tiny bit of water. The goal is to go for a pesto-like consistency. That's sort of a paste. And then you can create little hamburger patties and freeze them in between parchment paper. And then I just like to keep them in the freezer because, oftentimes when traumatic injuries, broken bones, dislocated shoulders, sprains, really bad bruises, these things happen all the time year round, and you may not have fresh Comfrey on hand. I also just like to have it in case anyone in my community needs it. And as I mentioned earlier, I really do like to infuse it into oil as well. Now I could talk, of course, about the respiratory components. Comfrey is also known to be a really powerful respiratory herb and a really good expectorant and helps to secrete and thin the mucus. But again, I don't really use Comfrey internally. Now, as promised, I'm going to actually show you the plant for a little bit and discuss some of the ways that we like to use it on the homestead and why I think everybody should be growing it. So here is just one of 6 beautiful Comfrey plants we have on the property. Now, I will warn you, this is a plant that's difficult to kill. This one here, that one over there, and a few of the others we have on the property are actually as a result of attempting to transplant, and you only need a portion of the root and it'll take. So you really only need to buy one of these. But as promised, I want to talk to you about the permaculture applications in terms of using Comfrey. One of our favorite things that we love about this plant is that it is very, very dense in nutrients, minerals, vitamins, all the things that our soil needs to grow our flowers and our fruit trees and our vegetables. So in the summer months, if we ever have any crops that are struggling, we will actually chop up some of these leaves, nice fine pieces if we can, just use scissors, and we fill a 5-gallon pail about a third of the way. We fill it with rain barrel water and we let it sit out in the hot sun all day, making a Comfrey tea, or what we call a manure tea. You strain out the Comfrey leaves. I like to wring them out for good measure so I get all of those minerals and nutrients, and then you water your garden with it. And I'll tell you, you will see an explosion in growth. So if you're looking for a natural fertilizer or a natural manure tea, this plant is an amazing ally. And one thing we're going to do with it this year is actually mulch the garden before winter. And we're going to take all of the leaves, because they're going to die. So I'm going to take all the leaves and I'm going to layer them on top of the soil so they can break down over the winter and provide all those amazing nutrients back to our plants. And of course, it'll come back next year because it is a perennial. So like I said, you've got medicinal applications and gardening and permaculture applications, which is why I strongly suggest that everybody grows Comfrey. If you have the space, she can get quite large. And I'll actually walk you over to the one in the medicine wheel garden. Hi, Malfoy. So this is actually the first one that we planted. And I am using a tripod, but I am still walking, so sorry for the jerky camera motion. But as you can see, this one here is growing in the shade. And normally Comfrey likes full sun. This actually gets quite a bit of shade, and look how big she's got. So make sure you give her lots of space and use her. Like that's my main thing when it comes to plants that grow large or rather invasive, is the trick is to actually use them. And that'll help keep the population at bay. So I hope you found today's video on Comfrey helpful and informative. I really love the multi-use application of this plant in terms of medicinal as well as permaculture and gardening uses. There's very few plants on this planet that, would help heal a dislocated shoulder as well as provide fertilizer for your garden. So I really do think as long as you have space, like I said, somewhere where you can let her get nice and big and grow, I do think everybody should be growing this plant. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. If you like the videos and you like the content, I really appreciate the subscribing and the thumbs up and the sharing. It really, really does help. And until next time, this is Correne from Spirea Herbs, wishing you health, wellness, and a great end to the fall season.